fog, and there are many types of fog. We'll go through a couple of them right now. Radiation fog, and we talk about radiation a lot here at the Weather Channel when we're talking about it being a very cold night, snow-covered ground, a good night for radiational cooling. Well, not only snow-covered, but any kind of surface will radiate heat, and it radiates it up into clear skies, into space actually. So if you don't have any clouds in the way, you're going to get good radiation, and that's how surfaces lose their heat. That's one of the ways. That's how they mostly lose their heat at night, radiating whatever heat they have out. And when it's 20 below zero, you're not thinking about heat, but it's losing heat to go from 10 to 20 below. Now in the valley, when that happens, if the temperature goes cold enough to reach the dew point or the frost point, if it's below freezing, you will get condensation into liquid droplets or maybe ice crystals. Either way, you're going to get fog. You're going to get lower visibilities, and it's actually a cloud that's forming from the surface up to just above the surface. Happens a lot in valleys. The cool air is heavy and it flows downhill. Gravity takes it down into the bottom of the valley, down the slopes. Also, without mountains, that can happen. The cold air at night under clear skies likes to lie low, and you get fog quite often. Advection fog is a different type of fog, on the other hand. For instance, around the Gulf of Mexico, and for instance, in the winter especially, when the ground is very cold. Say the ground temperature is in the 40s. Water temp in the 50s or even 60s over the Gulf of Mexico will bring warm and moist air. Dew points then will be around the water temperature, 50s or 60s, but the ground is only in the 40s, so that 40-degree ground temp will lower the air to its dew point, and again, when that happens, you would get dew on the grass, but in the air you get fog. You get little tiny water droplets over the land, and even if the temperature is below freezing, you still could get water droplets, super-cooled water droplets of fog, because it takes more than just freezing temperatures to cool tiny cloud droplets. California, just about the same effect when some warm air over the Pacific Ocean moves over the cold current that's a little closer to the land. There's very chilly waters, relatively speaking, right off the California coastline. Warm, moist air with high dew points over some colder water, and you get hundreds of miles of low clouds and fog, and some of that comes onshore, southern Cal, northern Cal, even down to Baja, California into Mexico in the summertime. You don't usually get that in the winter. Another type of fog is upslope fog, and you see that a lot, of course, around mountains, in the Rockies and the high prairies leading up to the Rockies. The air with any moisture at all will go up the slope and lose heat because it's expanding against pressure. It's expanding uphill, and expanding air does work against whatever air pressure there is, and work forces it to lose heat. So the cooling of the air will give you condensation of liquid droplets, and that's your fog, and you get that as you're heading up a slope toward a mountain. Well, for more about fog, Chapter 5, that's the chapter in the weather classroom.
Late fall and winter are the times when the fog is the thickest. December 11th, 1990 brought fog in Tennessee and one of the worst traffic accidents in American history. Okay, again, the dense blinding fog caused a tragic chain of accidents in the areas in the Tennessee River Valley. The accident occurred along Interstate 75, which runs between two mountains, and a thick valley fog formed in the narrow pass, causing visibilities to drop to near zero. Almost 100 vehicles were smashed, and 3 people were killed, and 42 were injured in that terrible tragedy in the state of Tennessee back in 1990. All right, let's come back now.
Well, we have another bit of video to show you. As we saw all those vehicles piled up, that's what could happen when you have some very serious fog. Also, some of the worst and longest lasting fog occurs in valleys. Neal Jones tells how that impacts travel and how valley fog is formed.
Fog is responsible for many traffic accidents each year. Valley fog in particular is the cause of countless fatalities and wrecks. It occurs most frequently in winter. During that time, the sun isn't strong enough to burn away the fog, but it can warm up the ground enough to evaporate the layer of fog closest to the ground. Because the air is trapped by mountains, the fog can last for days, or at least until the next weather system introduces winds to stir up the atmosphere. The broad and steep valleys of Southern California allow for very little circulation of air. Once the fog forms, it's usually there for several days. As drivers descend from the hills and mountains, visibility can drop off sharply in a matter of a few yards. That's what makes driving in fog so dangerous. Neal Jones, the Weather Channel.
Again, as Mike talked about earlier, radiation fog, rather common in the wintertime as we have our heat of the day being lifted back up into the atmosphere at night, and that helps to allow for the drainage of the cooler air. The cooler air is denser air, so not surprisingly, the denser air, kind of like it does in water, denser water drops to the bottom, denser air drops to the bottom and down into the valleys. Again, another key ingredient is a lack of wind at night and also some fairly high humidity levels during that daytime, and that's still the case down here in the south, so we may have to deal with that yet again tonight. And we had that this morning. What we have for you is a time lapse of a dissipating fog bank anywhere from Georgia down to northern Florida. You can see as time goes on, we slowly shrink that fog bank down, and the fog stayed pretty thick for quite a while. Down in Macon, Georgia, visibility was held down to under a half a mile right up until about 11:30 in the morning, while down around the Valdosta area and down towards Tallahassee, fog stayed very thick all the way till around 10 o'clock in the morning. But again, once we get through the latter morning hours, sun angle pretty high, it really helps to burn it off. We start also getting some more wind circulating, so we mix over that air, and that mixing effect helps to dissipate that fog. And again, we lose all the radiation fog as we approach the midday hour, and slowly but surely we unfold into a very nice day. And that is the case today in Georgia as well as Florida. Again, another type of steam fog, that is cold air over warmer water.